All right. This is on the prologue and first day, first chapter of the Living in Denial book. And I want to go over what's in the book to start with, and I want to go over a little bit of what's in the blogs. I think the blogs in general did a pretty good job. My only real concern is there's still a tremendous amount of focus on personal responsibility instead of understanding the ways in which individual action is socially situated, such that the individual is socialized to act in certain ways rather than individually responsible. I think the same thing is true of individual responsibility for climate production, but well, we'll have to deal with that. All right, so we have this place called Big Dabby. It gets that late, effectively no snow that one winter. It gets the lake not freezing, so there's no ice fishing. They describe there being much less variability in terms of the weather that they get from season to season. They get economic damage, but it's not yet devastating, though it looks like it's going to get worse. There's a tremendous amount of Norwegian environmental consciousness. They understand climate change and climate science. They understand its anthropogenic roots, and yet there is complete and total sociopolitical inactivity, both by individuals and collectively. And I think it makes a really, really neat case study for comparing to the US, because on the one hand, there's a great deal less science denial there, but on the other hand, there's not that much more political activity. One of the things I really liked about the beginning of it is the argument that when people feel powerless, they prioritize other things, and then she goes so far as to mention moral deterioration. And I think there's a way in which that fits very, very well with much of the reactionary politics on both the right and the left in the United States. All right. I think one of the things I was most, I don't want to go that far, that I was a little disappointed about in the blogs is I think the most important things in the readings for today are on the ways to understand that passivity. And there was a great deal more focus on the denial and the passivity, and a great deal more focus on the actual environmental conditions than there was on what she had to say about how she was approaching this problem. And I really liked that she started by trying to undermine the whole denial and passivity being explained by lack of insufficient information, sort of the information deficit approach, where people lack enough knowledge or they're too greedy or selfish, and so therefore they're disinterested and have a lack of concern or committed to some kind of denial. It seems in both Norway and I would argue that in the United States, surveys show that the vast majority of people know about climate change. They know it's anthropogenic. They believe it's happening. They understand that it's in their long-term interest to do something about this, but they feel powerless and they don't know what to do as individuals. And I think there sort of is the crux of both what she's trying to get at and one of the things I've been trying to stress in the class. Social psychologically, according to this author and according to the discipline, people judge as serious only those problems that they think they can or someone else can solve, that you can't commit yourself to a tremendous amount of work to solve a lost cause or something that you don't believe is going to generate a positive outcome. And so, in that sort of way, the intractability of social change, sort of climate politics, trumps the clarity and strength of climate science in many, many people's mind. Under those conditions, you have to protect yourself. And that's why she emphasizes emotions mattering so much to understanding sort of the approach to denial. People are aware of and uncomfortable about their contradictions, and they don't like to address them, especially at the level of the individual. So all sorts of people will say, I know it's bad not to recycle, but I can't solve the environmental problem, so just leave me alone. And they get very angry and very emotional. I really liked in that context the way she talks about all of this corresponding to the idea that we live in the age of numbing, and not in the book, but in something that I thought about having you read, is the ways that this correlates with what Ulrich Beck calls risk society. Back when most people believed that risks were natural, then you could imagine that there were either economic or technological solutions. But as our problems become increasingly the product of society, and in particular, technologically advanced social practices, and the product of those technologies themselves, it becomes harder to imagine that science and technology are going to solve problems rather than make them worse or simply displace them in time. If you can't solve social problems in order to get at ecological problems, and if you actually think that society is harder to change than nature is, then it becomes very, very difficult to take this stuff seriously in an emotional and political sort of way. I also like the way she really spoke about the absurdity of the double life, where people, on the one hand, have a set of personal understandings and beliefs, but they know very, very well that you can't live them on a day-to-day fashion. And they know that that's contradictory, but the question then becomes, what do you do when there appears to be no opportunity to participate in some form of collective action that's going to cause collective change that's going to make a positive difference? Now, then the question becomes, what is the obstacle that gets in the way of believing that you could make social change? And she spends a lot of time dancing around, or maybe just not addressing, this issue of the role of socialization in not only structuring what we see, how we construct the world, how we could imagine making it different, but also the kind of responses we have to the kind of contradictions we each embody. What is common sense for one group of people is not common sense for another, and it's not just that it's commonsensical that climate science is real and climate skepticism is ridiculous. It's that lots of people who believe that it's commonsensical to believe climate science, but it's equally commonsensical to believe that there are too many social obstacles to getting anything done. Then the question of what the value of common sense is immediately comes to mind. She says over the course of the rest of the book, she's going to combine this kind of effort that starts with Gramsci, that talks about hegemonic cultural practices and the kinds of ways that we're socialized to approach the world in some ways, and also borrow on Swidler to talk about cultural toolkits and the ways that we borrow on different aspects of our toolkits for everyday life. As I have here, she emphasizes the central role of emotions when it comes to normative things like common sense and the contradictions embedded in learned strategies of drawing on learned cultural toolkits to operate in the public and private realms of daily society. For most of us, then, climate inaction or denial isn't an individual practice, but it's a learned response. It's a social practice embedded in each of us as in individuals that leads us to throw up our hands rather than find ways to act collectively. And that's why she spent so much time talking about the social organization of denial, not in a way that focuses on the ways in which individuals are frozen, but in terms of the social organization of this kind of denial. All right. A lot of this is really focused on the seeming political and social intractability of trying to solve something global in scope with local actions. And I think lots of people believed, and if you look at the discussion of social democracy in here, lots of people all over the advanced industrial north believed that so long as you had a national economy and a national ecology, you could solve things with national politics. And people could imagine that if you amassed a whole bunch of little local struggles and people collaborated across locales, then you'd actually do something new and different and that would have an impact on the nation. Once you get to the global scale, it's a lot harder to believe that because, among other things, we have all these global institutions, but there are no democratic means for different populaces to hook up and have a voice there. All right. Now, I really liked the emphasis on the sort of the implacatory denial, the ways that people believe the science, they believe the outcome, they understand the threat, but the implications of taking that threat seriously are so overwhelming, are so intransigent that it becomes very, very difficult for them to feel like a moral person if they do nothing, and that allows them to deny the implications of doing nothing while they at the same time don't deny the science or the need for sorts of change. If you want to understand the prologue in particular, the last four pages do a really nice job of summarizing this. I'm not going to go over the stuff on the boundaries of the moral order in Big to Be. I think that stuff's pretty straightforward. It's largely descriptive. I don't think it adds a tremendous amount to our understanding, except in the ways that it lays out the ecological and social layers embedded in the community that will be the foundation for the understanding of the rest of it. It's not much of a discussion, but it's 10 and a half minutes of evaluation. We'll talk more about this on Thursday. See ya.